police are routinely attacked, murdered, seriously injured. Those memories never leave you. There's an acknowledgement now, absolutely, operational police will be traumatised. The support mechanisms just aren't there.
G'day, and welcome to Wellbeing. I'm Jack Hodgins. Today we are talking with David McGowan and Mick Cummings about PTSD support for police veterans. This continues on from our last episode talking with first responders about their PTSD journeys. David is the CEO of Police Veterans Victoria, and Mick Cummings is a retired police officer with decades of experience. Police Veterans Victoria is a not-for-profit organisation that supports Victorian police veterans and their families. In this episode, David and Mick offer their knowledge into the lack of PTSD support available for police veterans, and how PTSD affects not just the officers themselves, but the family and the people around them. Hello David and Mick, and welcome to Wellbeing.
Thanks, Jack.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the invite.
Before we begin, could you tell us a little bit about yourselves?
I'm the CEO of an organisation called Police Veterans Victoria. Been in the role for about almost 18 months now. It was set up a couple of years ago, so we're still in our infancy, and our role is to support police veterans, all police veterans, but with a bit of a focus on those who are struggling with the trauma and the impact of operational policing. So if you kind of look at open arms for the way defence veterans are supported, I guess that's the benchmark for us. I'm a police veteran myself. I spent just over 21 years in Victoria Police, went out into a corporate life and found myself back in the police family more recently in this role.
All right, and what's your story, Mick?
I joined Victoria Police when I was 19, just turned 19. I was in for 30-odd years. Towards the end of 2006, start of 2007, I realised mentally I'd had enough. I couldn't do it anymore. Basically, I got out. I think technically I resigned, but I suppose retired's the right option. And then just went and took on other jobs outside VicPol that I'd always wanted to do. But during that time, probably about 2003, 2002, I'd become involved with a peer support program within VicPol. Stuck with that right through, and then even when I got out, I still had a few mates that were either on the brink of getting out or unwell or had got out. So I used to just bring them up from time to time, see how they're going, catch up with them for a coffee, pretty simple sort of basic things. And then some stage about 2014, I guess, I was approached by a person from the Retired Police Association. There was a group for people that got out of the job, and they said, look, we want to extend the peer program within to the police veteran community. Myself and another person took on the role, and there was just the two of us. We started to get the peer support program from VicPol. We sort of took it, doctored it a bit, butchered it a bit, and then applied it to police and their families who were in the veteran community. But that was just two of us doing it. The model was never sustainable for a whole lot of good reasons. Basically, we were running it on the goodwill of police unions and things like that. So fast forward to about 2018, and Graham Ashton, the Chief Commissioner at the time, did a walk with the Secretary of the Police Association, Wayne Gatt, called a head-to-head walk, and they raised just on, I think it was about $500,000, and that then gave us the ability to professionalise the organisation, hence David's role within the organisation as the CEO. So we really went from two of us, and then there was me at one stage. Then we went to a committee structure, and then we've gone to a full-blown board with a charitable status. In a short period of time, it's had a interesting birth, so to speak, and it's a great organisation where it sits now. But where it started was just basically two of us and dragging in a lot of people that we knew that were peers within VicPol, but they'd got out. So we recruited them for our program, and every one of them put their hand up straight away and come on board. That's how we started. So it was sort of small steps and a few wobbly steps from time to time. But I think in the first couple of years we'd made contact with about 850-odd people. Some of them was pretty mild stuff, they just wanted to know where they could get some help on a few things, and others were people with, in a full-blown mental crisis that we've managed to get some support for them. So that, in a nutshell, sort of my story to where I am now, where I just I work now as a peer support person in the field and get a great amount of enjoyment out of it.
You're listening to Wellbeing, a nationally distributed radio show and podcast. Today we are speaking with police officers David McGowan and Mick Cummings about PTSD support for police veterans.
How common would you say are mental health issues / PTSD in the police force?
Look, I've heard lots of different figures. I tend to not call it PTSD. To me, it's a PTSI. It's an injury. It's not a disorder. It's an injury you have received as a result of your service. And it doesn't matter whether it's us or the fire brigade or paramedics or military. It's the same injury, just a different mechanism if you want to look at it like that. Now, numbers-wise, I think my personal belief is, and that's talking to a lot of different people and psychologists and former chiefs of Australian Defence Force, I think it's about 60-40. I think at the end of each person's service, there's about 60% that will come out reasonably okay, and there's about 40% that will come out impacted from everything from mildly to fairly severely. So my view of the world, 60-40. I've heard lower figures than that, and I've heard higher figures, but I'm sort of confident with that.
How much support broadly is there out there? We might start with David, and then we can go over to Mick for this one.
So in the veteran community, there's us. So if you think about the role of the employer, Victoria Police, they have a welfare team and a police psychology unit that support serving members. There is some extension of that to members once they leave, particularly those who are retired ill health, mental health issues, and that number's growing. But after that, there's nothing. And so that was really the genesis of our organisation starting. And let me just tell you, Jack, this is not something that's unique to Victoria. These issues are across every state, every operational policeman. And anecdotally, I think it would be fair to say if you've been an operational policeman for at least 5 years, you will have experienced some level of traumatic injury just because of the nature of the work. And those that stay in longer, for some, they're quite resilient and they can manage those experiences quite well, but everyone's got a tipping point. And policing is a much more complicated, far more demanding role than it was, say, for the time when Mick and I started out. We're just touching the tip of it. I think it's a much bigger issue, no doubt.
Is there anything you'd like to add to that, Mick?
Fully support what David stated there, and yes, it is the tip. Where really there's another, say in Victoria alone, there's another probably 10,000 police veterans out there that we haven't touched base with. They live, obviously all around Australia, all around the world, and the people we'd like to try and engage with. But we're at the mercy of a lot of different things, and police, when they leave the organisation, and if they're doing it under mental health reasons, then they're straight away, they're in a fight with the insurance companies. You look across at each state, I think it's only very recently that Western Australia actually had an ill health retired scheme. It's only been recently introduced in the last couple of years for Western Australia. The rest of the states, particularly New South Wales, they've got insurers up there that really it's a battle to the death, and sometimes the death of the police veteran who, through no fault of his own, has become unwell, and when he tries to get support, just isn't there because it becomes a monetary game. Once you attach a dollar figure to it, and if you've got an insurer who's got to answer to shareholders, they're going to fight you to the death to support you. And in a similar vein here in Victoria, sometimes it's a struggle. They're the sort of things that we've got to get over. And I always, David may or may not agree with me, but I sometimes compare it to the military. Like I just got an email the other day basically stating if you've done your national service, you're equivalent to a thing called a white card in the Department of Veteran Affairs. Automatically, all you've got to do is apply. It doesn't matter whether you've been injured, not injured, whatever. The fact that you went and did your national service, the fact that whether you went out of the country or not, or whether you did it, and then a change of government, you went back into your previous employer, you automatically get this white card. Well, to me, once again, it goes back, same injury, different mechanism, but a completely different range of support.
So it sounds in a lot of ways that we lack a national approach to PTSD and mental health issues in police officers.
That's absolutely right, Jack. We as a society in Australia, I think we look after our defence veterans reasonably well, but the support mechanisms for police veterans and defence are poles apart. And if you think about the operational tasks that police confront, some of them for 30 years like Mick, you're kitting up with all these weapons and firepower, and you're heading out into an unknown war of your own. You don't know who your enemy are, you don't know what their intentions are, but we know that all too often the target of these criminal intentions are police, and police are routinely attacked, murdered, seriously injured by the criminal element. The support mechanisms just aren't there. And I know that Defence that support has come from 100 plus years of history and multiple theatres of war and conflict. What we ask for is that the same considerations be applied to police who put themselves in harm's way on a daily basis to protect the society. It seems that society doesn't protect them when their turn comes to be needed. And that is a hidden tragedy in our society right now.
Is there anything you'd like to add to that, Mick?
I guess, taking it one step further, I mean, I spent probably out of the 30-odd years, I spent 20-odd years in the bush. You'd kit up, you'd go to work. Generally those days, although I think the rules have changed a little bit in Victoria now, but I was always working one up by myself. You get called out at, all hours of the day and night to, violence in the home situations. I won't call them domestic, so I think that belittles what's going on. It was basically violent attacks in the homes, and I'd go to those, by myself and just, pull up in the driveway and hope and pray that I wasn't the target as I walked up the driveway and things like that. And it's just a continual play on your mind as you're boxing forward. And, for someone like me that come out of the other end of it reasonably intact, I'm still, I still no doubt have my days. I think, to me, it's just unfair. I mean, if I applied tomorrow for a post-traumatic stress injury claim, I would be denied by the insurers because they've got a magic figure. I think it's 6 years from memory. David might know a little bit more about that. But basically, if I haven't put that claim in within 6 years, my claim will be denied. So I've got to take them to a court system to get them to acknowledge that I'm unwell. Now, if you're a Vietnam vet, 40, 50 years after the event, you put in a claim, it's accepted straight away. So you tell me where the fairness is in that, and I'm not belittling anything that these Vietnam guys did because I know a lot of them and I've worked with a lot of them. They've got their own journeys, but if you somehow can't treat one as well as the other, and especially in this day and age, I mean, when you look at it, you look at things like the Link siege up in Sydney, that was terror related. You look at an offender was shot outside a police station in Melbourne, and he attacked with a knife. That was terror related. He wanted to kill police, based on a belief that he had, based on what was going on overseas. So we're in a lot of ways we've crossed. We're no longer border. We're not defined by our borders. We're defined by our country, and I think our country needs to step up and support those people out there doing the job.
What are some solutions, or what would you like to see happen to improve this situation?
Well, we want the employer to step up and take responsibility for it. And for us, it's the government of Victoria, the state government. We want them to give us funding because at the moment we are self-funded. We spend a lot of our time rattling tins and looking for subscriptions from the corporates and from other police members to fund us. That should not be the case. We should not have to rattle tins to try and get enough money to keep our organisation running. So that's the first thing we want. Ideally, we'd like to see the police minister in Victoria have a portfolio for police veterans affairs. That's not an unreasonable argument. We'd like to see a much better national approach. Every state needs a police veteran support program and maybe a federated model where there's a national body that oversights it and we support each other. Like I said earlier, Jack, this is not unique to Victoria, yet we're the ones that have called it out and we're the ones that are trying to do something about it. But raising funds for a cause like ours has got its challenges. We've gone to trusts and foundations and they're pretty much saying, well, that's not what we're about. This is an employee-employer problem. You need to talk to them. We've started those conversations with government, but I wouldn't say we've had any success. They're the things that need to change. We need proper funding, we need more organisations in the other states, and we need better healthcare services available to the members to support them. These are the people that put themselves in harm's way to protect our society. I think it's time. Sometimes it's the society's turn to look after them.
For the listeners out there that may want to donate money to Police Veterans Victoria, where can they go?
We have a website, policeveteransvic.org.au. Anyone that wants to donate to us is a tax-deductible donation, so it actually works to your favour. If there's corporations that want to donate, we would welcome donations from anywhere. We have a corporate lunch in May. The website's a good start. We are talking to some New South Wales veterans who are rallying around and taking a submission forward to the Police Commissioner to get that up in place. And Queensland Police have already started. So they've agreed to adopt our model. So we've got us running, Queensland coming up close behind, and New South Wales keen to get in the race. if people are supportive of us, how about writing to the police commissioner or to your local member to say, what are you going to do about supporting police veterans in New South Wales in the same way?
What is the culture or attitude towards PTSD in the police force itself?
In the early days, and Mick can add his own experiences to this, but in the early days, it really wasn't considered to be an issue. And if you were involved in a fairly traumatic critical incident, and nearly every operational policeman is multiple times, you went for a drink, you turned to black humour, you made light of it. You really didn't call out for help. There were no peer support people. There was a very small welfare unit. It just wasn't considered to be a problem, and you just needed to harden up because that's what you signed up for. Well, that's true. We do sign up for this kind of work, but it doesn't mean you're not going to be affected by it. So I think the attitudes have changed. They've certainly changed in society. There's an acknowledgement now within the policing organisations that absolutely operational police will be traumatised. And in Victoria alone, there are many police that are off on long-term sick leave because of significant critical incidents, like the 4 members who were killed on the freeway or the Burke Street rampage. Those memories never leave you. There's an acceptance that that's an issue now. I'm just not sure they know how to tackle it yet.
Would you like to add something to that, Mick?
The way I look at it, there's 2 components to this. There's management and leadership. And what I've seen, and I'll give you an example. One day I was visiting a person with a mental health issue in a hospital in western suburbs of Melbourne. 2 wards up was a policeman from the same work unit with a broken leg. He'd broken it at work somehow. Now, I was in visiting the guy with the mental health issues, and their line manager, inspector, walked up the corridor, looked in the room for about half a second, and then kept going. He went up and visited the guy with the broken leg. They were both in hospital. So he knew how to deal with the person with the broken leg, and he either didn't want to or didn't know how to engage with the person with the mental health issues. So I think a lot of it is a lack of knowledge, and a lot of it is it's just too hard. I mean, our system is in Victoria. If you are off on long-term sick leave and you're on a roster, then you're a red line on the roster that can't be used. And the system out here is you don't get backfilled. So you've lost that person. So really, all the managers want to do is just manage that person off the roster as quick as they can so they can get them replaced and put another car crew on the road or highway patrol unit back on the road. So when you've got that mentality, yes, you're managing it, but you're providing no leadership. And instead of going and engaging with the person and saying, well, what can we do for you? How can we help you? What's the best thing we can do? And sometimes you can't. Sometimes they're cooked, they're done, they're not coming back. But you just hear these absolute horrific stories of not ringing or ringing on the last day of the month when they know they have to tick a box for a welfare check from a management point of view. And the bloke receiving the phone call or the woman receiving the phone call knows exactly what they're doing. So that adds to the angst. And I think what happens is you get that angry with the world that if you weren't unwell before, the management of your illness by the organisation that's employing you makes it worse. And it gets to the point where, I call it the 10-10 percenters. They all get up to 100% and that's it, you're never coming back. Where at one stage, it might have been quite feasible that you could, with a bit of support and a bit of help, come back. And a place like Victoria Police has got literally hundreds or thousands of managers, but leadership, Shane Patton at the top, good fella. A couple of his immediate support team that are good people, but by gee, she's thin on the ground after that. And I sort of understand why, but I don't think it's fair.
You're listening to Wellbeing, a nationally distributed radio show and podcast. Today we are speaking with police officers David McGowan and Mick Cummings about PTSD support for police veterans.
Are there any experiences from either of your careers that have really stayed with you since they happened, like any traumatic experiences or anything like that?
Those experiences all live with you, Jack. In my time, I went to think about the Wall Street police murders in 1988. I was a detective in the armed robbery squad, directly involved in all of that. I remember being in a homicide squad and the crime scene photos were on this investigator's desk. These are the photos from Wall Street. Have a look. And I wish I'd never done it because those images of those murdered police in uniform never leave you. The road fatalities, the murders, the bodies that are mutilated. There's things that you see as a policeman that just never leave. Now, most of the time, you accept it. But sometimes there's other triggers at play. And I can remember, this has been pretty blunt here, but the last death I investigated was a 16-year-old who hung himself in the rafters of the family room because he wasn't allowed to watch a TV show. That was 24 years ago. I can still tell you what he was wearing. I don't think it particularly bothers me, that scene, but those images stay with you all the time.
Do you have anything you'd like to add, Mick?
It's interesting. I spend a fair bit of time on the road with my current work, and I'll go to areas where I worked, and there's a section of the Maroondah Highway, probably a 20k section, and there, maybe every second kilometre post, I would have been to a serious incident there, or a fatal, or something. And I remember when I first started driving those roads, I was doing exactly what David said. I was looking at the kilometre posts, I was looking at the trees, and sometimes they've still got markers on there and family memorials and stuff, and it just flashes back absolutely straight away. It took me a long, long time, certainly one particular section of road, I'd detour around 30 or 40 k's, so I didn't have to go past it. And then eventually one day I said, well, I've got to deal with this somehow. So I contacted a psychologist, and she gave me a strategy for it, and I did, and it worked, worked very well. And she gave me a strategy for a few other incidents I'd been involved in, and similar to Dave, hanging of a young girl who, over bust up with a boyfriend. She was 19 or 20, and I still remember walking into the room and looking up, and there she is, and I'm thinking, why did she do this? And that image will stay with you forever. And she was connected to a reasonably known family Australia-wide, and every time there was an article, newspaper article or a TV program about these few of these particular people, I'd have to switch it off. I just couldn't watch it because it was that connect back to what I was doing. Now, that is happening every day of the week to every other either police veteran or serving policeman in Australia. And it just doesn't stop, and it will never stop. And that's why we've got to have that support to engage with these people, give them some strategies when they are unwell, and then, if they become very unwell and they have to leave the job, then support them, as much as we can. And that's where we're failing. That's where we're failing to do it, and we're failing to do it religiously. And to me, it's just, it's wrong. It always has been wrong. And back in the early days when I first joined, I remember a guy walked into, one of our police officers, he was on morning shift with me, and he walked into work one day, still in his pyjamas, and literally just with this gaze look on his face, and he said, I'm not well. And anyway, we put him into the car, took him into what was those days the police medical officer, the PMO, and PMO wrote a few pieces of paper, and that was the last time I saw him. And I heard from him about 3 years ago, so I basically hadn't seen him or heard from him in 40-odd years. He just disappeared off the planet, and he rang me up one day, and he said, I'm living in supported accommodation out in the southern suburbs of Melbourne. I saw your name on an article the other day, and I thought I'd give you a ring just to let you know how I'm going. So that's the sort of issues that we deal with.
What becomes harder to do in daily life when you have PTSD or mental health in the mix?
What basically happens, depending on how bad it is, sometimes you just don't want to engage with family, and that creates all sorts of issues because they'll say to you, what's wrong? And you'll do the old standard, there's nothing wrong, I'm fine. And then, it leads to the bust-ups of families. It leads to people splitting up, to kids becoming disengaged from their parents, all sorts of things. It also, in a worst-case scenario, you just don't leave your house, you lock your front door. And at the start of that COVID pandemic, I remember talking to a few different guys and girls, and they basically said, when people were locked down, couldn't leave their houses, couldn't do this, and they said, welcome to my world. We live this every day of the week, every day of the year, and some have done for the last 10, 15 years. They said the pandemic is our world. And that's the way it affects some. I mean, that's the sort of extreme. There's differences where, you might walk down the street and you're vigilant all the time, and at some stage you're hyper-vigilant. You walk into a room where there's a group of coppers having a cup of coffee, and 99.9% of them will be sitting with their backs to the wall facing the door. And that's just the nature of what they do because they're scanning for the bad guys. It is really sad that it's got to that point, but there's some of the things that happen. Or you'll be in a car. I mean, I'm a hopeless passenger. I'm always driving the car from the passenger seat, and drives my wife absolutely nuts, but that's just the way I am. I've looked over the journey. I've done a few courses and listened to a few professionals, and I've got a hell of a lot better than I was. But, everything I've described in the past, I've been that person. I would be happy to sit here like years ago, going back probably 10, 12 years ago, if you said to me, listen, Mick, you're going to sit at home in the house for a week, not see anyone. There's enough food in the fridge, and, if you want to go for a walk or go for a bike ride, but if you don't want to, you don't have to. I was that happy man. I would have sat there for a week and gone, hallelujah, how good is this? Until I realised it was unhealthy. And when you realise that it's unhealthy, then you try and do something to get out of it. But if you didn't get there in the first place, that's probably my message, is try and support these people before they get to that stage. Don't let them crash and burn and then try and drag them back from the abyss then, because it's so bloody hard that, sometimes it's impossible. And certainly with that peer program, like back in the early days when we kicked it off, we were supporting people. I think 1 or 2 suicided. Extremely, distressing for the family, extremely sad for the peer support program and, what I represented at the time. And, you beat yourself up really badly over it, but it's something that happened and there wasn't a whole lot we could do about it.
Is there anything you'd like to add, David?
Just that experiencing mental health makes you look at the world through a different lens. And a lot of the people that we deal with, they withdraw. They lose perspective. And so that's the importance of community. Having a community, using veterans who have got lived experiences that you can relate to is one approach. It's not the only one, but it's raising understanding. And I think Mick talked about it as well. Having a mental health, if you have a physical injury, you go to the doctor and you get some medicine, or you put your arm in a splint if you broke it and you wait for it to heal, because you can see it and you can get over it. But if you have a mental health injury, you can't see it. It's not tangible. Very hard for people to understand how to fix that one. But it's fixable. It is fixable. I mean, you can't give up on people. It is an injury. It is not a disorder. It is an injury that can be overcome with the right support. Having that support mechanism available and having the individual trusting it and willing enough to come forward and get the help. That's what's important.
Did either of you find it hard to open up to begin with about the PTSD?
Absolutely, because we've been trained right from the get-go that people with the mental health issues back in those days, we'd grab them, put them in the back of the divvy van, and you take them off to the psychiatric centres, and you might go via a GP and he'd assess them from outside in the van and say, yep, they're unwell, and you take them to these centres and they'd get locked up, and, that was the last you see of them. And sometimes they'd beat you home, like they'd say, oh no, this person's all right, let them go, and, put them in a taxi and home they come, sort of thing. But that sort of sets you up that you don't want to be one of them. And then the minute somebody says, well, look, I think you've got some mental health problems here going on, you think, hang on a minute, I'm not one of them, no way in the world. The reality is, yes, you are, and you need that treatment to get better. And if you don't, you can then start to self-medicate with alcohol. You can go doctor shopping, or you can start down the path of the illegal drugs like your ice and all that sort of stuff, heroin, smoking dope and all that sort of stuff. And then it's a real slippery path, because once you start to self-medicate, there's no one really there to get you off it. And, your mates will drop you in a heartbeat because they go, well, enough's enough, we can't stand to be around you anymore because of, the drivel you're talking and the rubbish you're carrying on with. So that's a huge, huge problem. But to accept it, I know that when I first time I went to a psychologist, I sort of blurted a whole lot of stuff out, and she just sat there and looked at me, and I thought, what's she going to do? And anyway, we spoke through a few issues, and the next time I went to one, there was a 50-point check that you have to do. Or they do, and they tick them off as you go. And basically, 0 on the point system, you're not too bad. 50 on the point system, the ambulance comes, gives you a hit of elephant juice and takes you away. Well, about halfway through this, I was up around the 30 mark, and I'm thinking, hang on, I know what's coming next. So, I backed off with my answers a bit and, become a little bit less truthful, I suppose you could say. But she did give me some strategies to deal with some issues, and it was fine, and probably from that time onwards, I've managed to, with the strategies she gave me, like a mental health professional, and being supported by the Police Veterans Victoria program and being supported by clinicians within that program, I've got myself to probably the best place I'm going to be. There's no, I don't think I'm going to improve much on that, but what I'm at the moment is pretty good anyway, so I'm happy with that.
Mick, when you first started talking about these things and you started opening up, how did that feel for you?
Confronting, and I think you really, I probably had that first conversation maybe a year 15 or 18 with a, say, talking 30 years, probably about year 15 or 18 with a GP. And he was a good GP because he supported an ambulance service in a town that I was working in. So he sort of knew. He knew what it was all about. But, with it comes, you've let your guard down. I mean, you're this person who is basically bulletproof, walk into a pub one up and quell any brawl and all that sort of stuff, to all of a sudden be sitting there vulnerable, crying your eyes out, telling them stuff that you've never, ever, ever told anyone before, partners included. That takes a hell of a lot. That's one of the issues too with going to a psychologist. If you can get onto one and keep it, they hear your story once and they know it. But if you get involved with that insurance scheme, and I'm probably digressing a little bit here, you get involved with that insurance scheme and they'll put they call them independent medical examiners, but they're paid for by the insurers, so how independent's that? But they will then get you to relive that story. Now, you're living some of those stories, not to get well, but for them to justify not paying you. So, the amount of trauma you relive over and over and over again telling these stories, a lot of the time it's not for anyone else's benefit other than to stop paying you or stop supporting you. And this is what a lot of police veterans and around Australia find, is they tell these stories, but they're not to make you better. They're to justify a position of an organisation. And to me, that is so wrong. To me, as soon as I walk in the door, if I say, and I'm working, I'm still in VicPol, I've got a mental health issue, that's it. The story's accepted, the treatment starts, and hopefully I get better, and then I'm back at work and I'm productive and I'm not doing all those sorts of things. But it's not the path we're down at the moment. And, nationally, and David touched on it there before, nationally, we need to be much better than that. I mean, certainly, look, I've approached federal politicians and they look at it and go, votes? Nah, no votes in this. And I tell them that, there's 100,000 odd full-time professional emergency service workers around Australia. And I said, that equates to votes. Don't you see that? And they can't. And that's one of the issues, one of the big issues we face.
Did you find that within yourself, Mick, that the PTSD, is it something that you recover from, or do you need to manage it ongoingly?
Absolutely. You manage it for the rest of your life. You'll have good days and bad days. A few years ago, I had lots of bad days. These days, one in a blue moon, I mightn't answer the phone for the day. Might get on the bike and go for a ride, or, grab the pack, go for a bushwalk, or go up and see a few mates, or I've got a bit of a block up in the bush. I'll just go up there, sit there, close the front gate. But it's something that's with you for the rest of your life. It's just making sure that you've got those tools in the toolbox to deal with it and understand it, and surround yourself with people that understand it as well. So you can ring them up and say, yeah, you know what, today I'm not having a good day, and they go, yeah, okay, tell us about it, and away you go. But you need that sort of support network, and informal, formal, call it what you want. It's great. David alluded to it before, years ago when we first joined up. If you went to a critical incident, you'd be down to the pub, you have 20 beers, that was your debriefing session, and that sort of works for a while. But if the alcohol becomes the crutch that you lean on for the rest of your life, then that becomes a problem. So I think we've progressed a lot, and there's certainly, we've got to become, each person that joins these emergency services, they've just got to be aware of their own triggers and their own levels where they're at, and then once they figure that out, support themselves and talk to their families. Like, I never ever spoke to my wife about some of the stuff that was going on in my head. It took me a long time, probably. We've been married for nearly 40 years now. I guess I would have been maybe 10 or 15 years in before I started to have some really honest conversations with her, and I didn't know what was going on because that level of knowledge in the community wasn't there.
What are some ways that a family member can help someone that's affected by PTSD?
From my point of view, is have knowledge of what mental health is and how it impacts people, understand a few, 1 in 4 in the community and all that sort of stuff, realise some of the triggers. Look, I've had people that I've supported through the veteran program, their partners have said to me, it was a female-male type arrangement, he is not the person I married, when we were both 24. He was this big, strong bloke that had, clear a pub with just a steely stare. Now I'm looking at this bloke who sits in the corner who sits there and drinks all day, and I don't understand it and I don't get it. So what I say and there's plenty of these short courses out there, for want of better terminology, understand them. There's plenty, you could spend weeks and weeks, in fact years, just looking at online publications that talk about it. But with the Police Veterans Victoria, if you're a partner of a person who's been boarded out or isn't unwell, contact them and say, look, what can I do? And, they'll send you some quick documentation that'll tell you exactly what you can say and what you don't say. And there's things that I don't want to, unfortunately my wife is really skilled up on this. There's things that I don't want to hear her say because, that will get me upset. So, in some cases when the relationship's broken down, partners will say things just to wind them up. It's sad, but it's true. So be knowledgeable about the subject, be skilled about the subject, and have some, I suppose, compassion's the right word. Yeah, have compassion for that person. And if you have that level of compassion, then it's a start. But if you're just going to say, get over it or get over yourself or this happens to everyone or toughen it up, like Dave said before, someone with a busted leg, you never tell them to toughen up with a broken leg by walking it off. You wouldn't do it for the obvious reason because it wouldn't work.
From all we've talked about, David and Mick, what would be the take-home for our listeners you'd want them to remember the most?
Well, what we want the listeners to understand is that police willingly put themselves out there, and we all loved it. We loved being in the job. In the early days, this is so good, this job. I would do this for nothing. I'm out there fighting the good fight. I'm doing God's work here. I'm protecting society, and they do. Police put themselves in harm's way. We just want the public to understand that there's a cost that comes with that. And while police looked after them, now there's a time when we want the public to look after us, and that comes through supporting organisations like ours. Don't just brush it off. Understand that there's a cost with that. We're part of your society, and some of us need help.
Anything you'd like to add, Mick?
If you're partnered up with someone who's in an emergency service, policing or whatever, be knowledgeable about, not so much about what they do, but some of the things that are going to be going on in their life. I mean, if you're sitting down on a couch one night and you're looking at a car accident or something, and you look at it and go, well, my husband was at that, or my wife in this day and age, or my partner, I suppose better terminology, was at that event today, and they've got that 1,000-yard stare going. They know how to engage with them. You can't afford in this day and age to be ignorant of what's going on because, your own life is so important that you can't engage with your partner, and I think if you can maintain those bonds, if you're a family member, a brother, a sister, a parent, you've just got to have that knowledge of what do I need to do to support this person, and then taking it to the next level from a leadership management point of view of an emergency service. Show leadership, don't be a manager, the world's full of managers. Show leadership within that organisation, and, if you say it, do it, don't talk about it and then walk it away. And, it's a bit like, I read a lot of things about International Women's Day, and then I read a whole lot of things about the companies that are making all these big motherhood statements actually paying 10, 20, 30, 40% less to their female employees than they are their males. So to me, there's a lot of, I'll say bull dust, I won't say bullshit because I probably can't say that on your program, but there's a lot of stuff out there that needs to be challenged, it needs to be questioned, and it needs knowledge. And if we've got knowledge, if knowledge is power, then so be it. But when you have knowledge, you can help those people that are out there doing it every day. And look, you mightn't like coppers, you mightn't like firers, you mightn't like paramedics. Don't care. Without them, we don't have a society. It'd be basically just anarchy in the streets. So we've got to do what we can do to the best of our ability.
Well, thank you for sharing your insight with us today, David and Mick. It was great talking with you.
No worries.
It was a pleasure. Thank you very much.
My guest today was CEO of Police Veterans Victoria, David McGowan. And my other guest was Mick Cummings, a retired Victorian police officer. Tune in for our next episode where we talk with a police officer from Boston, USA about his PTSD journey. And if you like this content, check out the rest of our series on PTSD. Thank you for listening. I'm Jack Hodgins, and all of us at Wellbeing wish you well.